I was standing on the front wall of the toughest maximum security prison in the state, and I was invisible. I pushed off with my legs and started the descent, but my hands slipped, the fear, the sweat, and I lost the cord. I fell. It was a very high wall. I knew it was a killing fall to the ground below. In an agony of terror and desperation, I grabbed at the cord and seized it. My hands were the brakes that slowed my fall. I felt the skin tear away from my palms and fingers. I felt it singe and burn. And slower, but still hard enough to hurt, I slammed into the ground, stood, and staggered across the road. I was free. I looked back at the prison once. The cord was still dangling over the wall. The guards were still talking in their towers. A car drifted past on the street, the driver drumming his fingers on the steering wheel in time to a song. I turned my back. I walked on through the lane into a hunted life that cost me everything I'd ever loved. When I committed the armed robberies, I put fear into people. From that time, even as I did the crimes, and on through prison and life on the run, fate put fear into me. The nights were steeped in it, and sometimes I felt as if the blood and the breath in my body were clotted with fright. The fear I'd put into others became 10 terrors, 50, 1,000, filling the loneliest hours of every night with dread. By day, in those early Bombay months, when the world worked and worried around me, I wedged my life into a busy thickness of duties, needs, and small pleasures. But at night, when the sleeping slum dreamed, the horror crept across my skin. My heart backed away into a black cave of memory. And I walked most nights while the city slept. I walked, and I forced myself not to look over my shoulder at the gun towers and the dangling power cord on the high wall that wasn't there. The nights, at least, were quiet. At midnight, every night in those years, the cops imposed a curfew on Bombay. Half an hour before 12, police jeeps gathered in the main streets of the central city, and began the enforced closure of restaurants, bars, stores, and even the tiny pavement shops that sold cigarettes and pawn. The beggars, junkies, and hookers who weren't already at home or hiding were chased from the footpaths. Steel shutters came down over the shop windows. White calico cloths were thrown over the tables in all the markets and bazaars. Quiet and emptiness descended. In the whirl and crush of people and purposes in Bombay's daylight scramble, it was impossible to imagine those deserted silences. But each and every night was the same, soundless, beautiful, and threatening. Bombay became a haunted house. For 2 to 3 hours after midnight, in an operation known as the Roundup, squads of plainclothes cops patrolled the vacant streets in search of criminals, junkies, suspects, and homeless, unemployed men. More than half the people in the city were homeless, of course, and many of them lived, ate, and slept on the streets. The sleepers were everywhere, stretched out on the footpaths with only a thin blanket and a cotton sheet to keep out the damp of night. Single people, families, and whole communities who'd escaped some drought, flood, or famine slept on the stone paths and in doorways, huddled together in bundled necessity. It was technically illegal to sleep on the streets in Bombay. The cops enforced that regulation, but they were as pragmatic about it as they were about enforcing the laws against prostitution on the street of 10,000 whores. A certain discrimination was required, and in fact the list of those they wouldn't arrest for the crime of homelessness was quite long. Sadhus and all other religious devotees, for example, were exempted. Elderly people, amputees, the sick, or the injured didn't find much sympathy, and were sometimes forced to move on to another street, but they weren't arrested. Lunatics, eccentrics, and itinerant entertainers such as musicians, acrobats, jugglers, actors, and snake charmers were occasionally roughed up, but they were invariably excluded from the roundup. Families, particularly those with young children, usually received no more than a stern warning not to remain longer than a few nights in a given area. Any man who could prove he had a job, however menial, by displaying the business card or written address of his employer, was spared. Single men who were clean and respectful and could demonstrate some level of education could usually talk their way out of an arrest, even if they weren't employed anywhere. And, of course, anyone who could pay baksheesh was safe. That left the very poor, homeless, unemployed, uneducated, single young men as the high-risk group in the midnight roundup. With no money to pay their way out of the police net, and not enough education to talk their way out, scores of those young men were arrested throughout the city, every night. Some of them were arrested because they fitted descriptions of wanted men. Some were found to have drugs or stolen goods in their possession. Some were well known, and the cops arrested them routinely on suspicion. Many, however, were simply dirty and poor and stricken with a sullen helplessness. The city didn't have the funds to provide thousands of pairs of metal handcuffs, and even if the money were found, the cops probably wouldn't have burdened themselves with heavy chains. Instead, they carried lengths of rough twine made from hemp and coconut fibers, and used it to tie the arrested men one to the other by the right hand. The thin rope was enough to hold the men because the victims of nightly roundups were mostly too weak, undernourished, and spiritually defeated to run. They submitted meekly, silently. When between a dozen and 20 men had been arrested and tied into the human chain, the 6 or 8 cops in the roundup squad marched them back to holding cells. For their part, the cops were fairer than I'd expected them to be, and undeniably brave. They were armed only with the thin bamboo cane known as the lathi. They carried no clubs, gas, or guns. They had no walkie-talkies, so they couldn't call for backup if they ran into trouble on the patrols. There were no vehicles to spare for the roundup, so the squads walked the many kilometers of their beat. And although they struck out often with the lathi, savage or even serious beatings were rare, much less frequent than police beatings in the modern, Western city where I'd grown up. Nevertheless, the roundup did mean days, weeks, or even months of confinement for the young men in prisons that were as bad as any in Asia, and the caravans of roped, arrested men that shambled throughout the city, after midnight, were more melancholy and forlorn than most funeral processions. In my late-night walks around the city, I was invariably alone when the roundup was done. My rich friends feared the poor. My poor friends feared the cops. Most foreigners feared everybody and kept to their hotels. The streets were mine as I searched their cool silences. On one of those night walks, about 3 months after the fire, I found myself on the seawall at Marine Drive. The broad footpath beside the seawall was bare and clean. A 6-lane road separated the seaside path from a horizon-wide, incurving crescent of affluence. Fine homes, expensive apartments, consular offices, first-class restaurants, and hotels that looked out over the black and heaving sea. There were very few cars on the drive that night, only one every 15 or 20 minutes, traveling slowly. Few lights shone in any of the rooms across the street behind me. A cool wind carried the clean, salt air in irascible gusts. It was quiet. The sea was louder than the city. Some of my friends from the slum worried about me walking alone on the streets at night. "Don't walk at night," they said. "The night is no safety in Bombay." But it wasn't the city that I feared. I felt safe on the streets. Strange and troubled as my life was, the city enfolded it within the millions of others as if it belonged there, no less than any other. And the work I was doing enhanced that sense of belonging. I gave myself assiduously to the role of slum doctor. I found books on diagnostic medicine and studied them by lamplight in my hut. I accumulated a modest cache of medicines, salves, and bandages, buying them from local chemists with money I earned in black market deals with tourists. And I stayed on there, in those squalid acres, even after I'd made enough money to leave. I stayed on in the cramped little hut when I could have moved to a comfortable apartment. I allowed my life to be swept up in the broiling, dancing struggle of their 25,000 lives. I bound myself to Prabhakar and Johnny Cigar and Qasim Ali Hussein. And although I tried not to think of Carla, my love put claws in the sky. I kissed the wind. I spoke her name when I was alone. On the seawall, I felt the cool breeze wash across the skin of my face and chest like water poured from a clay matka. There was no sound but my own breath in the wind and the crash of deep water on the rocks, 3 meters below the wall. The waves, reaching up in splash and spindrift, pulled at me. Let go. Let go. Get it over with. Just fall down and die. So easy. It wasn't the loudest voice in my mind, but it came from one of the deepest sources, the shame that smothered my self-esteem. The shame to know that voice. You let everyone down. You don't deserve to live. The world would be better off without you. And for all that I tried to belong, to heal myself with the work in the clinic, to save myself with the fool notion of being in love with Carla. The truth was that I was alone in that shame, and lost. The sea surged and shoved at the rocks below. One push, and it would all be over. I could feel the fall, the crash as my body struck the rocks, the cold slipperiness of drowning death. So easy. A hand touched my shoulder. The grip was soft and gentle, but firm enough to hold me there. I turned quickly in shocked surprise. There was a tall, young man standing behind me. His hand remained on my shoulder as if to brace me there, as if he'd read my thoughts a few moments before. "Your name is Mr. Lin, I believe," he said quietly. "I don't know if you can remember me. My name is Abdullah. We met at the den of the Standing Babas." Yes, I stammered. "You helped me. I remember you well. You left, you disappeared, before I got to thank you properly." He smiled easily, and took away his hand to run it through his thick, black hair. "No need for thanks. You would be doing the same for me, in your country, isn't it? Come, there is someone who wants to meet you." He gestured to a car that was parked at the curb 10 meters away. It had drawn up behind me, and the motor was still running, but somehow I'd failed to hear it. It was an Ambassador, India's modest version of a luxury car. There were 2 men inside, a driver, and 1 passenger in the back. Abdullah opened the rear door and I stooped to look inside. A man in his middle to late 60s sat there, his face half illuminated by the streetlights. It was a lean, strong, intelligent face with a long, thin nose and high cheekbones. I was struck and held at once by the eyes, an amber brilliance of amusement and compassion and something else, ruthlessness, perhaps, or love. His hair and beard were close cropped and white-gray. "You are Mr. Lin?" he said. His voice was deep, resonant, and supremely confident. "I am pleased to meet you. Yes, very pleased. I have heard something good about you. It is always a delight to hear good things, and even more pleasurable, when it concerns foreigners, here in our Bombay. Perhaps you have heard of me also. My name is Abdul Qadir Khan." Sure, I'd heard of him. Everyone in Bombay had heard of him. His name appeared in the newspapers every other week. People spoke about him in the bazaars and nightclubs and slums. He was admired and feared by the rich. He was respected and mythologized by the poor. His discourses on theology and ethics, held in the courtyard of the Nabila Mosque in Dongri, were famous throughout the city, and drew many scholars and students from every faith. No less famous were his friendships with artists, businessmen, and politicians. He was also one of the lords of Bombay's mafia, one of the founders of the council system that had divided Bombay into fiefdoms ruled by separate councils of mafia dons. The system was a good one, people said, and popular, because it had brought order and relative peace to the city's underworld after a decade of bloody power struggles. He was a powerful, dangerous, brilliant man. "Yes, sir," I answered, shocked that I'd inadvertently used the word sir. I loathed the word. In the punishment unit we were beaten whenever we failed to address the guards as sir. "I know your name, of course. The people call you Qadir. The word Bai, at the end of his name, meant elder brother. It was a term of respectful endearment. He smiled and nodded his head slowly when I said it, Qadir. The driver adjusted his mirror and fixed me in it, staring expressionlessly. There were fresh jasmine flowers hanging in garlands from the mirror, and the perfume was intoxicating, almost dizzying after the fresh wind from the sea. As I leaned into the doorway of the car, I became acutely conscious of myself and my situation. My stooping posture, the wrinkles in my frown as I lifted my face to see his eyes, the rim of guttering at the edge of the car's roof under my fingertips, and a sticker, pasted to the dashboard, that read "God bless I am driving this car." There was no one else on the street. No cars passed. It was silent, but for the idling engine of the car and the muffled churning of the shuffling waves. "You are the doctor in the Kalaba Hutments, Mr. Lin. I heard of it at once, when you went to live there. It is unusual, a foreigner, living in the Hutments. This belongs to me, you understand. The land where those huts stand, it belongs to me. You have pleased me by working there." I was stunned into silence. The slum where I lived, known as the Jopatpati, or the Hutments, half a square kilometer, with 25,000 men, women, and children, belonged to him. I'd lived there for months, and I'd heard Qadrbai's name mentioned many times, but no one had ever said that he owned the place. It can't be, I heard myself thinking. How can any one man own such a place, and all its lives? I'm not a doctor, Qadrbai, I managed to tell him. Perhaps that is why you are having such success in treating the sick, Mr. Lin. Doctors will not go into the Hutments willingly. We can compel men not to be bad, but we cannot compel them to be good, don't you find? My young friend, Abdullah, recognized you just now, as we passed you, sitting on the wall. I turned the car to come back here for you. Come. Sit inside the car with me. I will take you somewhere. I hesitated. Please, don't trouble yourself. No trouble, Mr. Lin. Come and sit. Our driver is my very good friend, Nazir. I stepped into the car. Abdullah closed the door behind me, and then sat in the front next to the driver, who adjusted the mirror to find and fix me in it again. The car didn't move off. Chilam Bano, Qadrbai said to Abdullah. Make a chilam. Abdullah produced one of the funnel-shaped pipes from his jacket pocket, placed it on the seat beside him, and set about mulling together a mix of hashish and tobacco. He pressed a ball, known as a goli, of hashish onto the end of a matchstick, and burned it with another match. The smell of the charas coiled into the perfume of the jasmine flowers. The engine of the car was still idling slowly and quietly. No one spoke. In 3 minutes the chilam was prepared, and offered to Qadrbai for the first dum, or puff. He smoked, and passed the pipe to me. Abdullah and the driver smoked then, passing the chilam for one more round. Abdullah cleaned the pipe quickly and efficiently, and returned it to his pocket. Chalo, Kader said. Let's go. The car moved away from the curb slowly. Streetlights began to stream into the sloping windshield. The driver snapped a cassette into the dashboard player. The soul-wrenching strains of a romantic ghazal slammed out at maximum volume from speakers behind our heads. I was so stoned that I could feel my brain trembling within my skull, but when I looked at the other 3 men they appeared to be perfectly controlled and composed. The ride was eerily similar to 100 stoned drives with friends in Australia and New Zealand when we'd smoked hash or grass, put loud music on the dashboard player, and cruised together in a car. Within my own culture, however, it was mainly the young who smoked and cruised with the music on max. There, I was in the company of a very powerful and influential senior man who was much older than Abdullah, the driver, and me. And while the songs followed regular rhythms, they were in a language that I couldn't understand. The experience was familiar and disturbing at the same time, something like returning, as an adult, to the schoolyard of childhood, and despite the soporific slump of the drug, I couldn't entirely relax. I had no idea where we were going. I had no idea how or when we would return. We were traveling toward Tardeo, which was the opposite direction to my home in the Colaba slum. As the minutes passed, I reflected on that particularly Indian custom of amiable abduction. For months, in the slum, I'd succumbed to the vague and mysterious invitations of friends to accompany them to unspecified places, for unknown purposes. You come, people said with smiling urgency, never feeling the need to tell me where we were going, or why. You come now. I'd resisted it a few times, at first, but I soon learned that those obscure, unplanned journeys were invariably worthwhile, frequently interesting and enjoyable, and quite often important. Little by little, I learned to relax, and submit, and trust my instincts, just as I was doing with Qadrbai. I never regretted it, and I was never once hurt or disappointed by the friends who abducted me. As the car crested the long, slow hill, leading down to the Haji Ali Mosque, Abdullah turned off the cassette and asked Qadrbai if he wanted to make his regular stop at the restaurant there. Kader stared at me reflectively for a moment, and then smiled and nodded to the driver. He tapped me on the hand twice with the knuckles of his left hand, and touched his thumb to his lips. Be silent now, the gesture said. Look, but don't speak. We pulled into a parking bay, beside and a little apart from a row of 20 other cars outside the Haji Ali restaurant. Although most of Bombay slept after midnight, or at least pretended to sleep, there were centers of sound and color and activity in the city. The trick lay in knowing where to find them. The restaurant near the Haji Ali Shrine was one of those places. Hundreds of people gathered there every night to eat and meet and buy drinks or cigarettes or sweets. They came in taxis and private cars and on motorcycles, hour after hour, until dawn. The restaurant itself was small and always full. Most of the patrons preferred to stand on the footpath and sit in or on their cars to eat. Music blasted from many of the cars. People shouted in Urdu, Hindi, Marathi, and English. Waiters scurried from the counter to the cars and back, carrying drinks, parcels, and trays with stylish skill. The restaurant broke the business curfew and should have been closed down by the officers of the Haji Ali police post, which was only 20 meters away. But Indian pragmatism recognized that civilized people in large, modern cities needed places to gather and hunt. The owners of certain oases of noise and fun were permitted to bribe various officials and cops in order to stay open, virtually all night. That wasn't, however, the same thing as having a license. Such restaurants and bars were operating illegally, and sometimes the appearance of compliance had to be displayed. Regular phone calls alerted the police post at Haji Ali when a commissioner or a minister or some other VIP intended to drive past. With a cooperative bustle, the lights were turned out, the cars dispersed, and the restaurant was forced to a temporary close. Far from discouraging people, that small inconvenience added a touch of glamour and adventure to the commonplace act of buying snacks. Everyone knew that the restaurant at Haji Ali, like every other illegal night spot in town that faked a close, would reopen in less than half an hour. Everyone knew about the bribes that were paid and taken. Everyone knew about the warning phone calls. Everyone profited, and everyone was well pleased. The worst thing about corruption as a system of governance, Didier once said, is that it works so well. The headwaiter, a young Maharashtrian, hurried up to the car and nodded energetically as our driver ordered for us. Abdullah got out of the car and walked to the long, crowded takeaway counter. I watched him. He walked with an athlete's touchy grace. He was taller than most of the other young men around him, and there was a striking, heads-up confidence in his bearing. His black hair was long at the back, reaching almost to his shoulders. He wore simple, inexpensive clothes, soft black shoes, black trousers, and a white silk shirt, but they suited him well, and he carried them with a certain martial elegance. His body was well muscled, and he looked to be about 28 years old. He turned toward the car, and I caught sight of his face. It was a handsome face, calm and composed. I knew the source of that composure. I'd seen the swift and lethal way he'd moved to disarm the swordsman at the den of the standing Babas. A few customers and all of the counter staff recognized Abdullah, and talked, smiled, or joked as he ordered cigarettes and pan. Their gestures were exaggerated. Their laughter was louder than it had been moments before. They crowded against one another and reached out to touch him often. It seemed that they were almost desperate to be liked by him, even just to be noticed by him. But there was hesitancy as well, a kind of reluctance, as if, despite everything in their talk and smiles, they didn't really like or trust him. It was also very clear that they were afraid of him. The waiter returned, and passed our food and drinks to the driver. He lingered at the open window beside Kadarbai, his eyes pleading to speak. "Your father, Ramesh, he is well?" Kader asked him. "Yes, bhai, he is well. But, I have a problem," the young waiter answered, in Hindi. He tugged nervously at the edge of his mustache. Kadarbai frowned, and stared hard into the worried face. "What kind of problem are you having, Ramesh?" It's my landlord, bhai. There will be an eviction. My family, we are paying double rent already. But the landlord is greedy, and he wants to evict us." Kader nodded thoughtfully. Drawing encouragement from his silence, Ramesh plunged on in rapid Hindi. "It's not just my family, bhai. All the families in the building are to be evicted. We have tried everything, made very good offers, but the landlord will not listen to us. He has goondas, and those gangsters have made threats, and even done some beatings. My own father was beaten. I am ashamed that I have not killed that landlord, bhai, but I know that this would only bring more trouble on my family and the other families in the building. I told my very honored father that we should tell you and that you would protect us. But my father is too proud. You know him. And he loves you. Bye. He will not disturb your peace to ask for help. He will be very angry if he knows that I spoke of our trouble in this way. But when I saw you tonight, my Lord Cotterby, I thought that the Bhagwan had brought you here to me. I am very sorry to disturb you. He fell silent, swallowing hard. His fingers were white in their grip on his metal tray. We will see what can be done about your problems, Ramu, Cotterby said slowly. The affectionate diminutive of the name Ramesh, Ramu, provoked a wide, child's smile on the young face. You will come and see me tomorrow, at 2 o'clock sharp. We will talk further. We will help you, inshallah. Oh, and Ramu. There will be no need to speak to your father about this, until the problem, inshallah, has been solved. Ramesh looked as though he wanted to seize Kader's hand and kiss it, but he simply bowed and backed away, muttering his thanks. Abdullah and the driver had ordered plates of fruit salad and coconut yogurt, and they ate with noisy appreciation when the four of us were alone. Cotterby and I had ordered only mango-flavored lassi. As we sipped the iced drinks, another visitor came to the window of the car. It was the chief officer of the Haji Ali police post. A great honor to see you again, Khatterji, he said, his face writhing into a grimace that was either a reaction to stomach cramp or an oily smile. He spoke Hindi with the strong accent of some dialect, and I found it difficult to understand. He asked after Cotterby's family, and then made some reference to business interests. Abdullah put his empty plate down on the front seat, and drew a packet, wrapped in newspapers, from under the seat. He passed it across to Kader, who opened a corner of the packet to reveal a thick bundle of 100-rupee notes, and then passed it casually through the window to the cop. It was done so openly, and even ostentatiously, that I felt sure it was important to Kader that everyone within 100 meters would see the bribe made and taken. The cop scrunched the parcel into the front of his shirt, and leaned aside to spit twice noisily, for luck. He came close to the window once more, and began to speak in a quick, urgent murmur. I caught the words body and bargain, and something about the thief bazaar, but I couldn't make sense of it. Kader silenced him with a raised hand. Abdullah looked from Kader to me, and then broke into a boyish grin. Come with me, Mr. Lin, he said quietly. We will see the mosque, isn't it? As we got out of the car I heard the cop say loudly, the Gora speaks Hindi? Bhagwan save us from foreigners. We walked to a deserted spot on the seawall. The mosque, at Haji Ali, was built upon a small, flat island that was connected to the mainland by a stone path, 333 steps long. From dawn to dusk, the tide permitting, that broad pathway was thronged with pilgrims and tourists. At high tide, the path was completely submerged, and deep waters isolated the island. Seen from the retaining wall on the road beside the sea, the mosque at night seemed like a great moored ship. Brass lanterns, throwing green and yellow light, swung from brackets on the marble walls. In the moonlight, the teardrop arches and rounded contours glowed white and became the sails of that mystic ship, and the minarets were so many towering spars. On that night, the swollen, flattened, yellow moon, known in the slum as a grieving moon, hovered hypnotic full above the mosque. There was a breeze from the sea, but the air was warm and humid. Swarms of bats flying overhead, along the lines of electrical wires, thousands of them, were like musical notes on a strip of sheet music. A very small girl, awake past her bedtime and still selling ribbons of jasmine flowers, came up to us and gave Abdullah a garland. He reached into his pocket to give her some money, but she refused, laughing, and walked away singing the chorus of a song from a popular Hindi movie. There is no act of faith more beautiful than the generosity of the very poor, Abdullah said, in his quiet tone. I had the impression that he never raised his voice above that softness. You speak English very well, I commented, genuinely impressed by the sophisticated thought and the way he'd expressed it. No, I don't speak well. I knew a woman, and she taught me those words, he replied. I waited for more, and he hesitated, looking out over the sea, but when he spoke again it was to change the subject. Tell me, Mr. Lin, that time at the den of the standing Babas, when that man was coming for you with a sword, what would you have done if I was not there? I would have fought him, I think. He turned to stare into my eyes, and I felt my scalp tightening with an unaccountable dread. I think you would have died. You would have been murdered, and you would now be dead. No, he had a sword, but he was old, and he was crazy. I would have beaten him. Yes, he said, not smiling. Yes, I think you are right, you would have beaten him. But the others, the girl and your Indian friend, one of them would have been hurt, or even killed, if you had survived. When the sword came down, if it did not strike you, it would have hit one of them. I think it is so. One of you would have died. You or your friends, one of you would be dead. It was my turn to be silent. The sense of dread I'd felt a moment before was suddenly a full-blown alarm. My heart was thumping a loudness of blood. He was talking about having saved my life, and yet I sensed a threat in his words. I didn't like it. Anger began to rise in me. I tensed, ready to fight him, and stared hard into his eyes. He smiled, and put a hand on my shoulder, just as he'd done less than an hour before at another seawall, on Marine Drive. As quickly as the tingling, intuitive sense of alarm arose, it also passed. As powerful as it had been, it was suppressed and gone. It was months before I thought of it again. I turned to see the cop saluting and moving away from Cater's car. Cotterby was very conspicuous about giving that cop a bribe. Abdullah laughed, and I remembered the first time I'd heard him laugh out loud, in the den of the Standing Babas. It was a good laugh, guileless and completely unself-conscious, and I suddenly liked him because of it. We have a saying in Persian, sometimes the lion must roar, just to remind the horse of his fear. This policeman has been making problems here at Haji Ali. The people do not respect him. For that, he is unhappy. His unhappiness is causing him to make problems. The more problems he makes, the less respect he gets from the people. Now they see such big bakshish, more than a policeman like him is getting, and they will respect him a little. They will be impressed that the great Cotterby pays him so well. With this little respect, he will make less problems for all of us. But still, the message is very clear. He is a horse, but Cater is a lion. And the lion, it has roared. Are you Cotterby's bodyguard? No, no, he laughed again. Lord Abdul Kader needs no protection. But, he paused, and we both looked at the gray-haired man in the back of the modest limousine. But I would die for him, if that is what you mean. That, and a lot more would I do for him. There's not a lot more you can do for someone than die for them, I replied, grinning at his earnestness as much as the strangeness of his idea. Oh yes, he said, putting an arm around my shoulder and leading us back towards the car. There is a lot more. You are making a friendship with our Abdullah, Mr. Lin? Cotterby said as we climbed back into the car. This is a good thing. You should be close friends. You look like brothers. Abdullah and I looked at one another and laughed gently at the words. My hair was blonde, and his was ink black. My eyes were gray, and his were brown. He was Persian, and I was Australian. At first glance, we couldn't be more dissimilar. But Cotterby stared from one to the other of us with such a puzzled frown, and was so genuinely bewildered by our amusement, that we swallowed our laughter in smiles. And as the car headed out along the Bandra road, I thought about what Cater had said. I found myself thinking that, for all the differences between us, there just might be some perceptive truth in the older man's observation. The car drove on for almost an hour. It slowed, at last, on the outskirts of Bandra, in a street of shops and warehouses, and then bumped into the entrance to a narrow lane. The street was dark and deserted, as was the lane. When the car doors opened, I could hear music and singing. Come, Mr. Lin, we go, Cotterby said, feeling no compulsion to tell me where we were going or why. The driver, Nazir, remained with the car, leaning against the bonnet and finally allowing himself the luxury of unwrapping the pawn that Abdullah had bought for him at Haji Ali. As I passed him to walk down the lane, I realized that Nazir hadn't spoken a single word, and I wondered at the long silences so many Indian people practiced in that crowded, noisy city. We passed through a wide stone arch, along a corridor and, after climbing 2 flights of stairs, we entered a vast room filled with people, smoke, and clamorous music. It was a rectangular room, hung with green silks and carpets. At the far end there was a small, raised stage where 4 musicians sat on silk cushions. Around the walls there were low tables surrounded by comfortable cushions. Pale green, bell-shaped lanterns, suspended from the wooden ceiling, cast trembling hoops of yellow gold light. Waiters moved from group to group, serving black tea in long glasses. At some of the tables there were hookah pipes, pearling the air with blue smoke and the perfume of charas. Several men rose immediately to greet Qadrbhai. Abdullah was also well known there. A number of people acknowledged him with a nod, wave, or spoken greeting. I noticed that the men in that room, unlike those at Haji Ali, embraced him warmly, and lingered as they held his hand between their own. I recognized one man in the crowd. It was Shafiq Gussa, or Shafiq the Angry, the controller of prostitution in the Navy barracks area near the slum where I lived. I knew a few other faces, a well-known poet, a famous Sufi holy man, and a minor movie star, from photographs in newspapers. One of the men near Qadrbhai was the manager of the private club. He was a short man, plumply buttoned into a long Kashmiri vest. The white lace cap of a Haji, one who'd made the pilgrimage to Mecca, covered his bald head. His forehead was discolored by the dark, circular bruise some Muslims acquire through touching their foreheads to a stone in their devotions. He shouted instructions, and at once waiters brought a new table and several cushions, setting them up in a corner of the room with a clear view to the stage. We sat cross-legged, with Kader in the center, Abdullah at his right hand, and me at his left. A boy, wearing a Haji cap and Afghan pants and vest, brought us a bowl of popped rice, sharply spiced with chili powders, and a platter of mixed nuts with dried fruits. The chai waiter poured hot, black tea from a narrow-spouted kettle through a meter of air without spilling a drop. He placed the tea before each of us and then offered sugar cubes. I was about to drink the tea without sugar, but Abdullah stopped me. "Come, Mr. Lin," he smiled, "we're drinking Persian tea, in the real Iranian style, isn't it?" He took a sugar cube and placed it in his mouth, holding it firmly between his front teeth. He lifted the glass then, and sipped the tea through the cube. I followed suit, imitating the steps. The sugar cube slowly crumbled and melted away and, although the taste was sweeter than I preferred, I enjoyed what was for me the strangeness of a new custom. Qadrbhai also took a sugar cube and sipped his tea through it, endowing the little custom with a peculiar dignity and solemnity, as in fact he did with every expression and even the most casual gesture. He was the most imperial human being I'd ever met. Looking at him, then, as he inclined his head to listen to Abdullah's light-hearted conversation, the thought came to me that in any life, and in any world, he would command men, and inspire their obedience. 3 singers joined the musicians, and sat a little in front of them. A gradual silence settled in the room, and then all of a sudden the 3 men began to sing in powerful, thrilling voices. It was a luscious sound, a layered and gorgeous music of passionate intensity. The men weren't just singing, they were crying and wailing in song. Real tears ran from their closed eyes and dripped onto their chests. I was elated, listening to it, and yet, somehow, I felt ashamed. It was as if the singers had taken me into their deepest and most intimate love and sorrow. They sang 3 songs then quietly left the stage, disappearing through a curtain into another room. No one had spoken or moved during the performance, but then everyone spoke at once as we forced ourselves to break the spell that had enveloped us. Abdullah stood up and crossed the room to talk with a group of Afghans at another table. "How do you like the singing, Mr. Lin?" Qadrbhai asked me. "I like it very much. It's incredible, amazing. I've never heard anything like it. There was so much sadness in it, but so much power as well." "What language was it? Urdu?" "Yes. Do you understand Urdu?" "No, I'm afraid I don't. I only speak a little Marathi and Hindi." I recognized it as Urdu because some of the people speak it around me, where I live. "Urdu is the language of ghazals, and these are the best ghazal singers in all Bombay," he replied. "Are they singing love songs?" He smiled, and leaned across to rest his hand on my forearm. Throughout the city, people touched one another often during their conversations, emphasizing the points they made with a gentle squeeze of pressure. I knew the gesture well from daily contact with my friends in the slum, and I'd come to like it. They're love songs, yes, but the best and most true of all love songs. They're love songs to God. These men are singing about loving God. I nodded, saying nothing, but my silence prompted him to speak again. "You are a Christian fellow?" he asked. "No, I don't believe in God." "There is no believing in God," he declared, smiling again. "We either know God, or we do not." Well, I laughed. I certainly don't know God, and frankly I'm inclined to think that God is impossible to believe in, at least most of the notions of God that I've come across. Oh, of course, naturally, God is impossible. That is the first proof that he exists. He was staring at me intently, his hand still resting warm on my arm. Be careful, I thought. You're getting into a philosophical discussion with a man who's famous for them. He's testing you. It's a test, and the water's deep. Let me get this straight. You're saying that because something is impossible, it exists? I asked, pushing a canoe of thought out into the uncharted water of his ideas. That is correct. Well, wouldn't that mean that all the possible things don't exist? Precisely, he said, smiling more widely. I am delighted that you understand. I can say those words, I answered, laughing to match his smile, but that doesn't mean I understand them. I will explain. Nothing exists as we see it. Nothing we see is really there, as we think we are seeing it. Our eyes are liars. Everything that seems real is merely part of the illusion. Nothing exists as we think it does. Not you, not me, not this room, nothing. I still don't get it. I don't see how possible things don't exist. Let me put it another way. The agents of creation, the energy that actually animates the matter and the life that we think we see around us, cannot be measured or weighed or even put into time, as we know it. In one form, that energy is photons of light. The smallest object is a universe of open space to them, and the entire universe is but a speck of dust. What we call the world is just an idea, and not a very good one, yet. From the point of view of the light, the photon of light that animates it, the universe that we know is not real. Nothing is. Do you understand now? Not really. It seems to me that if everything we think we know is wrong, or is an illusion, then none of us can know what to do, or how to live, or how to stay sane. We lie, he said with a flash of real humor in the gold-flecked amber of his eyes. The sane man is simply a better liar than the insane man. You and Abdullah are brothers. I know this. Your eyes lie, and tell you that this is not so. And you believe the lie, because it is easier. And that's how we stay sane. Yes, let me tell you that I can see you as my son. I was not married, and I have no son, but there was a moment of time, yes, when it was possible for me to be married, and to have a son. And that moment of time was, how old are you? I'm 30. Exactly, I knew it. That moment of time, when I could have been a father, was exactly 30 years ago. But if I tell you that I see it clearly, that you are my son, and I am your father, you will think that it is impossible. You will resist it. You will not see the truth, that I see now, and that I saw in the first moments when we met, a few hours ago. You will prefer to make a convenient lie, and to believe it, the lie that we are strangers, and that there is no connection between us. But fate, you know fate? Kismet is the word, in the Urdu language. Fate has every power over us, but two. Fate cannot control our free will, and fate cannot lie. Men lie, to themselves more than to others, and to others more often than they tell the truth. But fate does not lie. Do you see? I did see. My heart knew what he was saying, even as my rebellious mind rejected the words and the man who spoke them. Somehow, he'd found that sorrow in me. The hole in my life that a father should have filled was a prairie of longing. In the loneliest hours of those hunted years, I wandered there, as hungry for a father's love as a cell block full of sentenced men in the last hour of New Year's Eve. No, I lied. I'm sorry, but I just don't agree. I don't think you can make things true, just by believing them. I have not said that, he replied, patiently. What I am saying is that reality, as you see it, and as most people see it, is nothing more than an illusion. There is another reality, beyond what we see with our eyes. You have to feel your way into that reality with your heart. There is no other way. It's just, pretty confusing, your way of looking at things. Chaotic, in fact. Don't you find it chaotic, yourself? He smiled again. It is strange, at first, to think in the right way. But there are a few things we can know, a few things to be sure of, and it is relatively easy. Let me show you. To know the truth, all you have to do is close your eyes. It's that easy? I laughed. Yes, all you have to do is close your eyes. We can know God, for example, and we can know sadness. We can know dreams, and we can know love. But none of these are real, in our usual sense of things that exist in the world and seem real. We cannot weigh them, or measure their length, or find their basic parts in an atom smasher. Which is why they are possible. My canoe of thought was taking water, and I decided to bail out, fast. I've never heard of this place before. Are there many places like this? Perhaps 5, he replied, accepting the change of topic with tolerant equanimity. Is that many, do you think? I guess it's enough. There aren't any women. Are women not allowed to come here? Not forbidden, he frowned, casting about for the right words. Women are permitted here, but they do not want to come. There are other places where women gather, to do their own things and to hear music and singers, and no man would want to disturb them there, either. A very elderly man approached us and sat at Cotterbye's feet. He wore the simple cotton shirt and thin baggy pants known as a kurta pajama. His face was deeply lined, and his white hair was cropped into a short, punk cut. He was thin and stooped and obviously poor. With a curt but respectful nod to Cater, he began to mull tobacco and hashish in his gnarled hands. In a few minutes he passed a huge chillum to Cater, and waited with matches ready to light it. This man is Omar, Cotterbye said, pausing with the chillum almost to his lips. He is the best maker of the chillum in all Bombay. Omar lit the chillum for Cotterbye, breaking into a toothless grin and basking in the praise. He passed it to me, studied my technique and lung power with a critical eye, and grunted a sort of approval. After Cater and I had smoked twice, Omar took the chillum and finished it with gigantic puffs that swelled his thin chest to bursting. When he was finished, he tapped out a small residue of white ash. He'd sucked the chillum dry, and proudly accepted a nod of acknowledgement from Cotterbye. Despite his great age, he rose easily from the seated position without touching his hands to the floor. He hobbled away as the singers returned to the stage. Abdullah rejoined us, bringing a cut glass bowl filled with slices of mango, papaya, and watermelon. The scents of the fruits surrounded us as their tastes dissolved in our mouths. The singers began their next performance, singing just one song that continued for almost half an hour. It was a lush, tripartite harmony built upon a simple melody and improvised cadenzas. The musicians accompanying the singers on the harmonium and the tablas were animated, but the singers themselves were expressionless, motionless, with their eyes closed and their hands limp. As before, the silent crowd in the club broke out in rowdy chatter when the singers left the small stage. Abdullah leaned across to speak to me. While we were driving here in the car, I was thinking about being brothers, Mr. Lin. I was thinking about what Cotterbye said. That's funny, so was I. My 2 brothers. We were 3 brothers in my family in Iran, and now my 2 brothers, they're dead. They were killed in the war against Iraq. I have a sister, in Iran, but I have no brother. I am just one brother now. One brother is a sadness, isn't it? I couldn't answer him directly. My own brother was lost to me. My whole family was lost, and I was sure I would never see them again. I was thinking that perhaps Cotterbye saw something true. Perhaps we really are looking like brothers. Maybe we are. He smiled. I have decided to like you, Mr. Lin. He said it with such solemnity, despite the smile, that I had to laugh. Well, I guess in that case you'd better stop calling me Mr. Lin. It gives me the heebie-jeebies, anyway. Jeebies? He asked, earnestly. It is an Arabic word? Don't worry about it. Just call me Lin. Okay, I will call you Lin. I will call you Lin, brother. And you will call me Abdullah, isn't it so? I guess it is. Then we will remember this night, at the concert of the blind singers, because it is the night we begin brothering for each other. Did you say, the blind singers? Yes. You don't know them? These are the blind singers of Nagpur. They are famous in Bombay. Are they from an institution? Institution? Yeah, a school for the blind, maybe. Something like that. No, Lin, brother. At one time they could see, just as we are seeing. But in a small village near Nagpur, there was a blinding, and these men became blind. The noise around me was dizzying, and the once pleasant smell of the fruits and the charas was beginning to cloy and stifle. What do you mean, there was a blinding? Well, there were rebels and bandits, hiding in the mountains, near that village, he explained in his slow, deliberate way. The villagers had to give them food and other help. They had no choice. But when the police and soldiers came to the village, they made 20 people blind, as a lesson, as a warning to other people in other villages. This happens sometimes. The singers were not from that village. They were visiting there to sing at a festival. It was just bad luck. They were made blind with the rest. All of them, those men and women, 20 people, were tied on the ground, and their eyes were put out with sharp pieces of bamboo. Now they sing here, everywhere, and are very famous. And rich also. He talked on. I listened, but I couldn't respond or react. Qadrbai sat next to me, conversing with a young, turbaned Afghan. The young man bent low to kiss Kader's hand, and the butt of a gun appeared within the folds of his robe. Omar returned and began to prepare another chillum. He grinned up at me with his stained gums and nodded. Yes, yes, he lisped, staring into my eyes. Yes, yes, yes. The singers came back to sing again, and smoke spiraled up into the slash of slowly revolving fans, and that green silk room of music and conspiracies became a beginning for me. I know now that there are beginnings, turning points, many of them, in every life, questions of luck and will and fate. The naming day, the day of the flood sticks in Prabaker's village, when the women gave me the name Shantaram, was a beginning. I know that now. And I know that everything else I'd been and done in India up to that night in the concert of the blind singers, perhaps even the whole of my life, was a preparation for that beginning with Abdul Qadir Khan. Abdullah became my brother. Qadrbai became my father. By the time I realized that fully, and knew the reasons for it, my new life as brother and son had taken me to war, and involved me in murder, and everything had changed forever. Qadrbai leaned across after the singing stopped. His lips were moving, and I knew he was speaking to me, but for a moment I couldn't hear him. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. I said that the truth is found more often in music, he repeated, than it is in books of philosophy. What is the truth? I asked him. I didn't really want to know. I was trying to hold up my end of the conversation. I was trying to be clever. The truth is that there are no good men or bad men, he said. It is the deeds that have goodness or badness in them. There are good deeds and bad deeds. Men are just men. It is what they do, or refuse to do, that links them to good and evil. The truth is that an instant of real love, in the heart of anyone, the noblest man alive or the most wicked, has the whole purpose and process and meaning of life within the lotus folds of its passion. The truth is that we are all, every one of us, every atom, every galaxy, and every particle of matter in the universe, moving toward God. Those words of his are mine forever now. I can hear them. The blind singers are forever. I can see them. The night and the men that were the beginning, father and brother, are forever. I can remember them. It's easy. All I have to do is close my eyes. Chapter 10. Abdullah took his brothering seriously. A week after the night of the blind singers, he arrived at my hut in the Cuff Parade slum carrying a satchel filled with medicines, salves, and bandages. He also brought a small metal case containing a few surgical instruments. We went through the bag together. He asked me about the medicines, wanting to know how useful they were and what quantities I might need in the future. When he'd satisfied himself, he dusted off the wooden stool and sat down. He was silent for a few minutes, watching me pack the supplies he'd brought into a rack of bamboo shelves. The crowded slum chattered, brawled, sang, and laughed around us. Well, Lynn, where are they? He finally asked. Where's who? The patients. Where are they? I want to see my brother healing them. There can't be healing without sick people, isn't it? I don't have any patients just now. Oh, he sighed. He frowned, drumming his fingers on his knees. Well, do you think I should go and get you some? He half rose from his seat, and I had a vision of him dragging sick and injured people to my hut by force. No, take it easy. I don't see people every day. But if I do see people, if I'm here, they usually start coming around 2 o'clock. They don't come this early in the morning. Nearly everyone works until at least noon. I'm usually working myself. I have to earn money too, you know. But not this morning? No, not today. I made some money last week. Enough to last me for a while. How did you make this money? He stared at me ingenuously, unaware that the question might embarrass me or be taken as rude. It's not polite to ask foreigners how they make their money, Abdullah, I informed him, laughing. Oh, I see, he said, smiling. You made it by the illegal means. Well, that's not exactly the point. But yes, now that you mention it. There was this French girl who wanted to buy half a kilo of charas. I found it for her. And I helped a German guy get a fair price for his Canon camera. They were both commission jobs. How much did you make with this business? He asked, his eyes not wavering. They were a very pale brown, those eyes, almost a golden color. They were the color of sand dunes in the Thar desert on the last day before it rains. I made about 1,000 rupees. Each business, 1,000? No, both jobs together made 1,000. This is very little money, Lin brother, he said, his nose wrinkling and his mouth puckering with contempt. This is tiny, very small money. Well, it might be tiny to you, I mumbled defensively, but it's enough to keep me going for a couple of weeks or so. And now you are free, isn't it? Free? You have no patience? No. And you have no little commission business to do? No. Good. Then we go together, now. Oh, yeah? Where are we going? Come, I will tell you when we get there. We stepped out of the hut and were greeted by Johnny Cigar, who'd obviously been eavesdropping. He smiled at me, and scowled at Abdullah, then smiled at me again with traces of the scowl in the shadows of his smile. Hi, Johnny. I'm going out for a while. Make sure the kids don't get into the medicines, okay? I put some new stuff into the shelves today, and some of it's dangerous. Johnny thrust his jaw out to defend his wounded pride. Nobody will touch anything in your hut, Lin Baba. What are you saying? You could put millions of rupees in there, and nobody would touch anything. Gold also you could put in there. The Bank of India is not as safe as this, Lin Baba's hut. I only meant that. And diamonds, also, you can leave in there. And emeralds. And pearls. I get the picture, Johnny. No need to worry about all that, Abdullah interjected. He makes such tiny money that nobody would have the interest to be taking it. Do you know how much money he made last week? Johnny Cigar seemed suspicious of Abdullah. The hostile scowl pinched his face a little tighter, but he was intrigued by the question, and his curiosity got the better of him. How much? I don't think we need to go into this right now, guys, I grumbled, struggling to head off what I knew could become a 1-hour discussion of my tiny money. 1,000 rupees, Abdullah said, spitting for emphasis. I seized him by the arm and gave him a shove along the path between the huts. Okay, Abdullah, we were going somewhere, weren't we? Let's get on with it, brother. We took a few steps, but Johnny Cigar came after us and tugged at my shirt sleeve, pulling me a pace or two behind Abdullah. For God's sake, Johnny. I don't want to talk about how much money I made, right now. I promise, you can nag me about it later but, no, Lin Baba, not about that, he rasped, in a scratchy whisper. That man, that Abdullah, you shouldn't trust him. Don't do any business with him. What is this? What's the matter, Johnny? Just don't, he said, and might have said more, but Abdullah turned and called to me, and Johnny sulked off, vanishing in a twist of lane. What is the problem? Abdullah asked as I drew level with him, and we set off between the snaking lines of huts. Oh, no problem, I muttered, knowing that there was. No problem at all. Abdullah's motorcycle was parked on the roadway, outside the slum, where several kids were watching over it. The tallest of them snapped up the 10-rupee tip Abdullah gave them, and then led his ragged urchin band away at a whooping run. Abdullah kicked the engine over, and I climbed up onto the pillion seat behind him. Wearing no helmets, and only thin shirts, we swung out into the friendly chaos of traffic, heading parallel to the sea towards Nariman Point. If you know bikes at all, you can tell a lot about a man by how he rides. Abdullah rode from reflex rather than concentration. His control of the bike in motion was as natural as his control of his legs in walking. He read the traffic with a mix of skill and intuition. Several times, he slowed before there was an obvious need, and avoided the hard braking that other, less instinctive riders were forced to make. Sometimes he accelerated into an invisible gap that opened magically for us, just when a collision seemed imminent. Although unnerving at first, the technique did soon inspire a kind of grudging confidence in me, and I relaxed in the ride. At Chowpatty Beach, we turned away from the sea, and the cool breeze from the bay was stilled and then choked off by streets of tall terraces. We joined shoals of traffic in a steamy drift towards Nana Chowk. The architecture there was from the middle period of Bombay's development as a grey port city. Some of the buildings, constructed in the sturdy geometries of the British Raj, were 200 years old. The detailed intricacies of balconies, window surrounds, and stepped facades reflected a luxurious elegance that the modern city, for all its chrome and glamour, rarely afforded itself. The section from Nana Chowk to Tardeo was known as a Parsi area. It had surprised me, at first, that a city so polymorphous as Bombay, with its unceasing variety of peoples, languages, and pursuits, tended to such narrow concentrations. The jewelers had their own bazaar, as did the mechanics, plumbers, carpenters, and other trades. The Muslims had their own quarter, as did the Christians, Buddhists, Sikhs, Parsis, and Jains. If you wanted to buy or sell gold, you visited the Jhaveri Bazaar, where hundreds of goldsmiths competed for your custom. If you wanted to visit a mosque, you found several of them within walking distance of one another. But after a while I realized that the demarcations, like so many other long and short lines of division in the complex, culturally polyglot city, were not as rigid as they'd seemed. The Muslim quarter had its Hindu temples, the Jhaveri Bazaar had its vegetable sellers among the glittering jewels, and almost every tower of luxury apartments had its adjacent slum. Abdullah parked the bike outside the Bhatia Hospital, one of several modern hospitals and clinics which were endowed by charitable Parsi trusts. The large building housed expensive wards for the rich and free treatment centers for the poor. We climbed the steps and entered a spotlessly clean marble foyer pleasantly cooled by large fans. Abdullah spoke to the receptionist and then led me down a corridor to the busy casualty and admissions section. After more questions to a porter and a nurse, he finally located the man he sought, a short and very thin doctor who sat at a cluttered desk. "Dr. Hamid?" Abdullah asked. The doctor was writing and didn't look up. Yes, he answered testily. "I have come from Sheikh Abdul Qadir. My name is Abdullah." The pen stopped at once, and Dr. Hamid slowly lifted his head. He stared at us with a look of apprehensive curiosity. It was a look you see sometimes on the faces of bystanders witnessing a fight. "He telephoned to you yesterday and told you to expect me?" Abdullah prompted quietly. Yes, of course," Hamid said, regaining his composure in an easy smile. He stood up to shake hands across the desk. "This is Mr. Lin," Abdullah introduced me, as the doctor and I shook hands. It was a very dry and fragile hand. "He is the doctor in the Kalaba Hutments." No, I protested. "I'm not a doctor. I've just been sort of co-opted into helping out there. And I'm not trained for it, and not really very good at it." "Qadirbai tells me that when you spoke to him, you complained about the referrals you're making to the St. George and other hospitals," Hamid said, getting down to business, and ignoring my protest with the air of a man who was too busy to indulge another's modesty. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, and glistening behind the polished lenses of his gold-framed glasses. "Well, yes," I replied, surprised that Qadirbai had remembered my conversation with him and that he'd found it important enough to tell the doctor. "The problem is that I'm flying blind, if you know what I mean. I don't know enough to cope with all the problems people come to me with. When I come across illnesses that I can't identify, or what I think are probably illnesses, I send them to the diagnostic clinic at St. George Hospital. I don't know what else to do with them. But a lot of the time they come back to me without having seen anyone, no doctors, no nurses, no one. These people are not feigning illness, you think?